I spent 32 years putting my daughter's needs before my own. I worked 2 jobs to pay for her private education, co-signed her first apartment lease, and even postponed my retirement to help with her graduate school tuition. Last Christmas, in front of our entire family, she announced that I was too confused about finances to manage my own money and suggested her husband take over my accounts. What she didn't know was that I'm a former financial advisor who'd been silently building a 7-figure investment portfolio, and her designer lifestyle depended entirely on my generosity. The look on her face when I canceled her credit cards and bought myself a beachfront condo will stay with me forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Claire Wilson. I'm 63 years old now, but this story begins when I was just 30. Young, recently divorced, and struggling to raise my 4-year-old daughter Vanessa on my own. Her father, Michael, had decided that life wasn't for him and left us for his 22-year-old secretary. The divorce settlement was minimal. Michael had hidden most of his assets, and my attorney wasn't skilled enough to find them. I was left with a modest house in the suburbs of Portland, child support that arrived sporadically at best, and a determination to give Vanessa everything she needed to succeed. Back then, I worked at a local bank as a customer service representative. The pay wasn't great, but it covered our basics. Nights and weekends, I took accounting classes at the community college, studying after Vanessa went to bed. I'd always had a knack for numbers, something my ex-husband had discouraged me from pursuing during our marriage. "No one wants financial advice from a housewife," he'd said whenever I suggested going back to school. Now, I was free to follow that path. 4 years of night classes later, I earned my degree in finance and landed a job at Westbrook Financial Planning. My salary nearly doubled, and for the first time, I could breathe a little easier. Vanessa was 8 by then, a bright, beautiful girl who excelled in school but struggled socially. The other children in our middle-class neighborhood had the latest toys, brand-name clothes, and vacations to Disney World. Vanessa had secondhand everything and summers at her grandmother's farm. "Mom, why can't I have light-up sneakers like Jessica?" she'd ask. "Everyone has them." "We're saving for more important things," I'd explain, "like your education fund." But the disappointment in her eyes cut deep. I didn't want my divorce to deprive her of childhood joys. So I took on consulting work on weekends, building financial plans for small business owners in our community. Every extra dollar went into 2 places: Vanessa's needs and a separate investment account I kept, strictly confidential. By the time Vanessa entered high school, our circumstances had improved dramatically. I'd been promoted to senior financial advisor, managing portfolios for high-net-worth clients. I understood money now, how to grow it, protect it, and make it work over time. More importantly, I'd learned that financial security wasn't about showing wealth. It was about building it quietly and deliberately. Vanessa, however, had developed different values. She'd made friends with girls from wealthier families, and the pressure to fit in was intense. Designer labels, expensive electronics, exclusive summer camps. Suddenly, these weren't luxuries, but necessities in her world. "Everyone's going to France with the language club," she'd plead. "It's educational, Mom, not just a vacation." And I'd give in. Not because I couldn't say no, but because I remembered the sting of being left out as a child. My own parents had struggled financially, and I'd sworn that Vanessa would have opportunities I never did. So I paid for France, and later Spain, and then the prestigious private university that cost more per year than I'd made annually at the beginning of my career. What I didn't do was explain where the money came from. I never showed Vanessa my investment statements or the careful budgeting that made her lifestyle possible. I didn't want to burden her with adult concerns. Instead, I simply made things happen, often at the cost of my own needs. My retirement contributions remained minimal, while her college fund grew. I drove the same sedan for 15 years while she got a new car for her 18th birthday. I took staycations while funding her spring breaks in Cancun. Was it a mistake to shield her from financial reality? Perhaps. But at the time, it felt like love. During Vanessa's senior year of college, she met Thomas Harrington. He came from old money, as he was fond of mentioning, though I later discovered his family had lost most of their fortune generations ago. What remained was the attitude of wealth without the substance. Thomas majored in business administration, but seemed more interested in connections than concepts. He had a firm handshake, perfect teeth, and not a single callus on his manicured hands. "He's going to be a phenomenal success," Vanessa gushed during one of our weekly phone calls. "His father knows everyone in Boston finance." I had my doubts, but I kept them to myself. Vanessa was 22, the same age I'd been when I married her father. Who was I to question her judgment when mine had been so flawed at her age? They married the summer after graduation, in a ceremony that cost more than my house. I offered to contribute what I could, but Vanessa and Thomas had grander visions. "We've got this, Mom," Vanessa assured me. "Thomas's family is handling everything." What actually happened was that they took out massive loans that they expected Thomas's first big finance job to cover. That job didn't materialize as quickly as they'd anticipated. Instead, Thomas bounced between entry-level positions, never staying long enough to advance. "The opportunities weren't right," he'd explain. "I'm not settling for mid-management when I'm executive material." Meanwhile, Vanessa had secured a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Boston. Her starting salary was impressive, but not enough to sustain the lifestyle they'd established. Their apartment in Beacon Hill, the weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, the country club membership Thomas insisted was essential for networking. It all added up to far more than they could afford. 6 months after the wedding, the calls began. "Mom, we're in a bit of a tight spot this month," Vanessa would say. "Just temporary, of course. Thomas has 3 promising interviews next week." I'd transfer money, first hundreds, then thousands, always with the understanding that it was a loan, though repayment was never mentioned again. I didn't mind, not really. I had the means to help, and I wanted them to succeed. My investment portfolio had performed exceptionally well over the years. I'd focused on blue-chip stocks with strong dividends, reinvested consistently, and watched my modest contributions grow into substantial wealth. What bothered me wasn't the money itself. It was that neither Vanessa nor Thomas seemed to recognize the need to adjust their spending. Instead, their lifestyle expanded. Thomas leased a luxury car for client meetings. Vanessa redecorated their apartment with designer furniture. They took a 2-week trip to Italy because Thomas needed to recharge after all the job hunting. When Vanessa called to tell me they were expecting their first child, my concerns doubled. A baby would bring joy, but also expense. I suggested they consider moving to a more affordable area, perhaps closer to me in Portland, where I could help with childcare. "Move to Portland?" Vanessa laughed. "Mom, Thomas's career is in Boston. Besides, we're looking at private schools already. The waiting lists are incredible. You have to apply before the baby's even born." My grandson Jackson was born the following spring. He was perfect. Tiny fingers, bright eyes, and a future already mapped out by parents who could barely manage their credit card bills. I flew to Boston for a month to help, and what I saw troubled me deeply. Their apartment was filled with baby items from the most exclusive boutiques. The nursery alone must have cost thousands, yet there were constant whispered arguments about money, hushed when I entered the room. On my last night there, I sat Vanessa down while Thomas was out with friends. "Honey, I'm worried about your finances," I said gently. "A baby changes everything, and it might be time to create a more solid budget." Vanessa stiffened. "We're fine, Mom. Thomas is expecting a promotion." "Even so," I pressed, It would be wise to have a contingency plan. I could help you set up a financial framework? No offense, she interrupted. But your idea of financial planning is clipping coupons and driving cars until they fall apart. Thomas and I have a different approach. Her words stung, but I let it go. She was exhausted from new motherhood, and I didn't want to add to her stress. Instead, I set up a college fund for Jackson before I left and added both Vanessa and Thomas as authorized users on one of my credit cards for emergencies. Those emergencies quickly became regular occurrences. First, it was unexpected baby expenses. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then, home repairs. Then the private preschool tuition that came due before Thomas received his annual bonus. The charges on my card grew from hundreds each month to thousands, but I said nothing. My portfolio continued to perform well, and I took satisfaction in knowing I was helping to provide stability for my grandson. 3 years later, when Vanessa announced they were expecting twins, I knew their financial house of cards was about to collapse. Thomas had finally secured a position at a respectable firm, but his salary nowhere near matched their expenditures. They'd need a larger apartment, a bigger car, double the childcare costs. Without discussing it with them, I liquidated one of my smaller investment accounts and set up a dedicated fund for their needs. The twins, Emma and Olivia, arrived 7 weeks premature. The medical bills were substantial, even with insurance. I covered them without hesitation, along with a part-time nanny for the first 6 months. When Thomas mentioned they were considering moving to a larger place in Cambridge, I offered to help with the down payment. "You'd do that for us?" Thomas asked, seeming genuinely surprised. "Family takes care of family," I said simply. What I didn't say was that I'd been planning to retire that year. At 61, I'd saved carefully and had more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But with 3 grandchildren who needed security, I decided to continue working. My needs could wait a little longer. The pattern continued. Their spending increased with every raise and bonus Thomas received, always staying just ahead of what they could actually afford. My credit card became their safety net, used for everything from grocery deliveries to Thomas's golf club membership. I paid the bills without comment, watching my retirement date recede further into the future. Whenever I visited Boston, I noticed a subtle shift in how they treated me. There was an air of condescension in their explanations of their sophisticated lifestyle choices. They'd exchange glances when I mentioned practical concerns like insurance or education costs. Once, I overheard Thomas refer to me as charmingly frugal to a friend, as if my financial prudence were an eccentric quirk, rather than the very thing that had built their safety net. But nothing prepared me for what happened last Christmas. We'd gathered at their new Cambridge home, a beautiful brownstone they got an incredible deal on, according to Thomas, though I knew exactly how much of the down payment had come from my accounts. The grandchildren were opening presents, extravagant gifts I couldn't help noticing, when the conversation turned to my upcoming retirement. "Have you decided what to do with the house?" Thomas asked casually. "I'm keeping it," I replied. "I love my garden, and it's paid off completely." Thomas and Vanessa exchanged one of their looks. "Mom?" Vanessa said in the tone one might use. With a confused child, "We've been talking, and we think it might be better if you sold the house and moved into a retirement community. Something with less maintenance." "I don't want less maintenance," I said, surprised. "My home keeps me active." "It's not just about the maintenance," Thomas interjected. "It's about making sound financial decisions at this stage of life." I raised an eyebrow. "My financial decisions have always been sound." "Mom," Vanessa said, lowering her voice though the children were thoroughly distracted by their new toys, "we're concerned. You're getting older, and financial management becomes more challenging with age. We've seen some questionable spending lately." "Questionable spending?" I repeated. "The credit card," Thomas explained, as if I might have forgotten its existence. The charges have been increasing. We worry you might be getting confused about money matters. I sat very still, processing what was happening. My daughter and son-in-law, whose lifestyle I had subsidized for years, whose children's education, funds I had established, whose home I had helped purchase, were suggesting I couldn't manage my own finances. What Thomas means, Vanessa continued, is that we think it would be best if we helped oversee your accounts going forward, just to make sure everything's in order. For your own protection, Thomas added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I looked around their expensively decorated living room, at the designer clothes they wore so casually, at the luxury watch gleaming on Thomas's wrist, all made possible by the financial acumen they now questioned. I see, I said quietly. And what exactly would this oversight entail? Nothing invasive, Thomas assured me. You'd just add me as a co-signer on your accounts. I could monitor transactions, make sure everything looks appropriate. Maybe set up some reasonable spending limits. For my protection, I repeated. Exactly, Vanessa beamed, clearly relieved I seemed to be taking it well. And it would give us peace of mind, too. We worry about you living alone with access to substantial funds. I smiled politely and changed the subject, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. For decades, I'd supported, sacrificed, and enabled without recognition. I'd been the invisible foundation upon which they'd built their privileged lives. And now, they wanted to control the very resource they'd depended on but never acknowledged. As I flew back to Portland the next day, I made a decision. It was time for Vanessa and Thomas to learn exactly who had been confused about money all these years. It was time for the truth to come out. And more importantly, it was time for me to finally put myself first. The first thing I did upon returning home was pull my complete financial records. 32 years of careful planning, investing, and growth spread across my dining room table. My portfolio was worth just over $2, $3 million, not counting my mortgage-free home, my retirement accounts, or the various funds I'd established for my grandchildren. For decades, I'd lived well below my means, quietly building wealth while presenting a modest image to the world. Next, I printed out every credit card statement from the past 5 years, the ones showing my daughter and son-in-law's spending, habits, designer clothes, exclusive restaurants, first-class upgrades, spa weekends. The emergencies had evolved into a lifestyle subsidy that averaged $6,500 per month. That was more than most families' mortgage payments, funded entirely by the woman they now deemed too confused to manage money. I also compiled a complete accounting of every direct transfer I'd made to their accounts. The down payment on their brownstone, the twins' medical bills, Jackson's private school tuition, the loan for Thomas's investment opportunity that had mysteriously never been mentioned again. The total made me catch my breath. $347,992 over 7 years, not including the credit card expenses. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to be strategic. Simply confronting them would lead to defensiveness, denials, perhaps even a family rift that would separate me from my grandchildren. I needed to demonstrate the consequences of their assumptions in a way they couldn't ignore or explain away. I scheduled a call with my financial advisor, Martin, who had been managing my investments for nearly 2 decades. I need to make some significant changes, I told him. Is everything all right, Claire? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Everything is about to be, I replied. First, I closed the credit card account that Vanessa and Thomas had been using. Not just removing them as authorized users, completely shutting down the account. Then I contacted the private school where Jackson attended and the preschool where the twins were enrolled. I explained that while the current term's tuition would remain paid, I would not be contributing further. The same went for the children's extracurricular activities, the horseback riding lessons, the private swim instructor, the French tutor for a 5-year-old. These were difficult calls to make. I adored my grandchildren and had always wanted to give them every advantage. But I reminded myself that true advantage comes from understanding value, appreciating sacrifice, and recognizing that actions have consequences, lessons their parents had failed to learn despite my best efforts. Next, I visited my attorney and updated my estate plans. The trust funds for my grandchildren remained untouched. Those were for their education and would be managed independently until they turned 25. But the considerable assets that would have gone directly to Vanessa were now redirected to a carefully structured trust with specific conditions for distribution. Finally, I contacted a real estate agent, not to sell my home as Thomas and Vanessa had suggested, but to help me find a second property. "I'm looking for something on the Oregon coast," I explained. "A place where I can watch the sunset over the ocean." 2 weeks passed without any contact from Boston. I knew the credit card had been declined somewhere, probably at some high-end store or restaurant, but they hadn't called to ask why. Perhaps they were embarrassed, or maybe they assumed it was a temporary system error. Either way, the silence wouldn't last long. The call came on a Tuesday evening as I was reviewing listings for beachfront properties. "Mom?" Vanessa's voice had the forced lightness that signaled an uncomfortable conversation ahead. "How are you?" "I'm wonderful, actually," I replied, truthfully. "Just looking at some investment opportunities." "Oh, what kind of investments?" The surprise in her voice was evident. Financial discussions had never been part of our regular conversations. "Real estate primarily," I said. "But that's not why you called, is there?" A pause, then. "Well, there seems to be some issue with the credit card. Thomas tried to pay for Jackson's birthday party venue yesterday, and it was declined." "Yes," I said simply. "I closed that account." Another pause, longer this time. "You closed it? Without telling us? I assumed you'd notice eventually. Mom, we had arrangements in place. Commitments. Jackson's party is this weekend, and we've got the caterers expecting payment, and the twins need their spring wardrobe update." "Vanessa," I interrupted gently, "why would I continue funding these expenses when you clearly believe I'm incapable of managing my own money?" "What? I never said—" "At Christmas, you and Thomas suggested I was confused about finances and needed supervision. I believe Thomas wanted to be added as a co-signer on my accounts to establish reasonable spending limits for my protection. That was just— we were worried about you living alone. It wasn't about the credit card." "Wasn't it?" I kept my voice calm. "The thing is, Vanessa, I've been reviewing my financial records. Do you know how much I've contributed to your household since Jackson was born?" She didn't respond. "Almost $350,000, not counting the credit card expenses or the children's trust funds. That's direct transfers to your accounts." "Mom, you offered—" "I did," I agreed. "I offered because I could afford to help and because I love you and your children. But I never expected that generosity to be repaid with suggestions that I'm mentally unfit to handle my own affairs." "It wasn't like that," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then what was it like, Vanessa? Help me understand why my financial judgment was sound when it benefited you, but questionable when it comes to my own retirement." There was a shuffling sound, and then Thomas's voice came on the line. "Claire, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're only looking out for your best interests. By suggesting I sell my home and move into a retirement community at 63. By monitoring my spending as if I were a teenager with their first credit card. Studies show that cognitive abilities, including financial management skills, decline with age," he said in the patronizing tone I'd grown to recognize. "We're being proactive." "Interesting," I replied. "And what studies have you reviewed on the impact of financial dependency on young professionals' development?" Because I've become quite the case study in enabling behavior over the past decade. This isn't about us, Thomas insisted. This is about protecting you. You're right about one thing, Thomas. This isn't about you anymore. It's about me finally protecting myself from exploitation, from disrespect, and from the assumption that my value lies solely in what I can provide. No one's exploiting you, he scoffed. We're family. Families help each other. Indeed, they do. But help isn't the same as dependency, and respect should flow in both directions. So, what are you saying? Vanessa had reclaimed the phone, her voice tight with anxiety. You're just cutting us off? After everything? I'm saying that our financial relationship needs to change. You and Thomas are intelligent, capable adults with good jobs and every advantage. If you can't afford your current lifestyle without my subsidies, then perhaps it's time to make different choices. We have children, Mom, commitments, a mortgage. Yes, you do, and you have careers that many would envy. The average American family manages on far less than your household income, Vanessa. They make choices and set priorities every day. I can't believe you're doing this. Her voice had shifted from anxiety to anger. After all we've done for you. I couldn't help it. I laughed. What exactly have you done for me, Vanessa? We were going to take care of you in your old age. We were going to make sure you were looked after when you couldn't manage anymore. By controlling my assets and deciding where I should live? That's not care. That's custody. Thomas came back on the line, his tone sharp. You know what? Fine. Keep your money. We don't need your help. We never did. We were just trying to be nice, including you in our lives, making you feel useful. And there it was. The truth laid bare. In their minds, my financial support wasn't generous assistance, but a transaction where they graciously allowed me to participate in their superior lifestyle. Thank you for your honesty, Thomas, I said quietly. It clarifies everything. Claire, wait. He seemed to realize he'd overstepped. I'll send you both an email outlining the changes I've made regarding the children's educational funds. Those remain secure and will be available when they're older. As for everything else, I wish you luck managing within your actual means. I ended the call before they could respond, my hands trembling not with grief, but with an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own well-being over others' expectations. It felt foreign, uncomfortable, yet undeniably right. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages, some pleading, others accusatory. Vanessa swung between reminding me of all I'd miss, my grandchildren's milestones, and attacking my character, selfish, vindictive, having a senior moment. Thomas took a different approach, sending links to articles about cognitive decline and suggesting we consult a professional together about these concerning changes in behavior. I responded to none of them. Instead, I drove to the coast to view the beachfront property I'd been considering, a modern 2-bedroom condominium with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. The asking price was substantial, but well within my means, especially now that I wasn't supporting a second household. It's perfect, I told the real estate agent as the afternoon sun scattered diamonds across the water. I'll take it. 2 weeks after purchasing my beach property, I invited my closest friend, Diana, to visit for the weekend. Diana and I had worked together at Westbrook for nearly 20 years. She knew my financial situation and had often questioned my continued support of Vanessa and Thomas. This place is absolutely stunning, she said, stepping onto the balcony with a glass of wine. I still can't believe you kept it a secret from everyone. Not everyone, I corrected. Just those who thought they needed to manage my finances for me. Diana laughed, shaking her head. The irony is delicious. Your daughter and her husband thinking you're financially confused while living off your expertise. To be fair, they never knew what I did for a living, not really. Vanessa was young. when I started at Westbrook, and I never discussed the details of my work with her. Later, it just didn't come up. Still, Diana persisted, they must have wondered how you afforded to help them so much on what they assumed was a modest salary. I shrugged. People tend to see what confirms their existing beliefs. They saw my practical car and modest home and assumed financial limitation rather than financial choice. That evening, as we prepared dinner in my new gourmet kitchen, Diana asked the question I'd been avoiding. Have you heard from Vanessa since the credit card incident? Oh, yes, I replied, slicing vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. Daily texts about how they've had to make sacrifices like canceling their country club membership and switching Jackson to the less prestigious soccer league. How devastating for them, Diana said dryly. The latest drama is that they can't afford their spring break trip to Barbados. Thomas is apparently working too hard to be denied a proper vacation. Working hard at what, exactly? Spending your money? I laughed, despite myself. He does have a real job, Di. It just doesn't pay enough for the lifestyle they've created. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Vanessa, for the third time that day. I let it go to voicemail. You'll have to talk to her eventually, Diana pointed out. I know, but not until I'm ready. Not until I'm certain I won't give in again. The following Monday, I returned to Portland to find a FedEx envelope waiting at my primary residence. Inside was a formal letter from a Boston law firm representing Vanessa and Thomas, requesting a family mediation regarding disputed financial arrangements and verbal commitments. I called my own attorney immediately. They're trying to intimidate me, I explained after forwarding the letter, possibly laying groundwork to challenge my competence if I don't reinstate their funding. It's an empty threat, my attorney assured me. They have no legal claim to your assets, regardless of past support. As for competence, your ongoing professional work and clear financial records would easily counter any such challenge. Should I respond to the mediation request? Only through me. If they want to discuss this formally, we'll do it by the book. That evening, I drafted a brief email to Vanessa. I've received the letter from your attorney. All further communication should go through my legal counsel. I attached my attorney's contact information and pressed send before I could reconsider. Her response came within minutes. Are you seriously involving lawyers? This is family, Mom. I didn't reply. 3 days later, I received another call, this time from an unexpected source. It was Bradley Stevens, Thomas's boss at Henley Financial. Claire Wilson, this is Bradley Stevens from Henley in Boston. I hope you don't mind. The call. Your son-in-law Thomas gave me your number, said you might be interested in some investment opportunities we're developing. Did he now? I kept my tone neutral. And what exactly did Thomas tell you about me? Just that you're recently retired, looking to diversify, possibly needing some guidance on maximizing returns. We specialize in helping clients in your demographic transition to retirement. My demographic. I could almost hear Thomas's pitch. Elderly widow, financially naive, substantial assets ripe for management. The commissions on such an account would certainly help Thomas's position at the firm. Mr. Stevens, I said carefully, I appreciate the call, but I should clarify something. I'm not just recently retired. Until last year, I was a senior financial advisor at Westbrook Planning, managing portfolios substantially larger than my own. Before that, I spent 15 years in wealth management for high net worth clients. Silence on the line. In fact, I continued, I'm quite familiar with Henley's performance metrics. Your mid-cap growth fund has underperformed the market by approximately 3% over the past decade, with expense ratios nearly double the industry average. More silence then. I wasn't aware of your background, Ms. Wilson. No, I don't imagine Thomas shared that detail. Likely for the same reason he's never mentioned to you that I declined his suggestion to transfer my portfolio to Henley 3 years ago, after comparing your returns unfavorably to my current management strategy. I see. Bradley's tone had shifted from solicitous to cautious. Well, this is unexpected. Indeed. While I have you, I'm curious. Did Thomas suggest this call might result in a commission opportunity for him? The hesitation told me everything. We don't discuss internal compensation matters with clients. Of course not. But perhaps you might discuss with Thomas the ethics of misrepresenting a prospective client's financial sophistication for personal gain. In some regulatory contexts, that could be problematic. I'll have a conversation with him, Bradley conceded. Thank you, I'd appreciate that. And Mr. Stevens, I'd prefer no further solicitations from Henley representatives. My portfolio is quite well managed as is. I ended the call feeling a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction at having asserted my expertise, disappointment that Thomas had attempted to exploit me professionally, and a growing certainty that the breach in our relationship might be irreparable. That certainty was reinforced the following week when I attended a charity gala in Portland. As a longtime donor to educational causes, I'd purchased a table at the annual fundraiser for college scholarships for low-income students. Diana accompanied me, along with several former colleagues from Westbrook. Midway through the evening, as the silent auction was closing, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Robert Carmichael, one of Portland's most prominent real estate developers and a former client. Claire Wilson, the rumors are true. You've finally retired. His smile was genuine beneath his silver hair. Westbrook must be lost without you. They're managing, I laughed, though I do miss some aspects of the work. Well, if you get bored, my offer still stands. We could use your expertise on our investment committee. He glanced at my table. Companions. She's being modest, folks. This woman made me more money than my last 3 advisors combined. As Robert moved on to greet other guests, Diana leaned over. Your phone is lighting up like crazy. I glanced down to see multiple notifications, all from Vanessa. Curious, I opened the most recent message. Why am I hearing from people that you were some big-shot financial advisor? Is this some kind of joke? Attached was a screenshot from the charity's social media page, showing me in conversation with Robert, with a caption identifying me as Claire Wilson, former senior financial advisor at Westbrook Planning and major donor to tonight's scholarship fund. I showed Diana the message and she raised an eyebrow. Well, the truth emerges. I should have told her years ago, I admitted. But she never asked what I actually did at Westbrook. She just assumed I was some kind of administrative assistant. And now? I considered my options. I could ignore the message, continue the standoff. I could respond defensively, listing all the times Vanessa could have asked about my career, but didn't, or I could simply acknowledge the truth. I typed, yes, I was a financial advisor for over 20 years, and a rather good one. We should talk about this in person, not over text. Her response was immediate. You lied to us. All these years, pretending to be barely getting by while judging us for our spending. I sighed and replied, I never lied about my profession or my finances. You never asked, and I never corrected your assumptions. As for judgments, those went both ways, Vanessa. The next morning, I returned to my coastal condo to find Vanessa and Thomas sitting in their car in the visitor parking section. My heart raced at the sight of them. I hadn't expected a confrontation so soon, and certainly not at my new home that they shouldn't have known about. I parked my car and took a deep breath before stepping out. No point in delaying the inevitable. As I approached, they emerged from their vehicle, both looking tired and tense. Vanessa's eyes were puffy from crying. How did you find this place? I asked as I unlocked the door to my unit. Mom, you literally put the address in the email about the children's trusts, Vanessa said with a hint of her usual exasperation. Did you forget? I hadn't forgotten. I'd included it deliberately, knowing this confrontation would happen eventually. Better on my territory than theirs. "Come in," I said simply, leading them into the spacious living area with its panoramic ocean view. Thomas whistled as he took in the modern furnishings, the Sub-Zero refrigerator visible in the open kitchen, the original artwork on the walls. This must have cost a fortune. "It was within my budget," I replied. "Coffee?" "We didn't fly across the country for coffee," Thomas said sharply. Vanessa shot him a warning look. "Mom, we need to talk about what's happening. You've been acting completely out of character." "Have I?" I moved to the kitchen and began preparing coffee anyway. The familiar routine gave me something to focus on beyond my racing heart. Or have I finally started acting in accordance with my actual character rather than the one you assigned me? What's that supposed to mean? Vanessa's voice had that brittle quality it got when she was trying not to cry. I measured coffee grounds carefully. "It means that for decades, I've allowed you to believe I was financially struggling because it was easier than explaining why I chose to live below my means. It means I let you assume I was financially unsophisticated because correcting you seemed unnecessary as long as everyone's needs were being met." "Why would you do that?" Thomas demanded. "What was the point?" "There was no point, Thomas. No grand strategy. I simply didn't think it mattered what you believed about my finances as long as I could help when needed." I turned to face them. "It didn't become relevant until you decided I was incapable of managing my own money." Vanessa looked around the condo, at the tasteful luxury that surrounded us. "So all those years when we invited you to visit and you said you couldn't afford the trip, when we offered to help with your bills, that was all just, what, a test?" "No," I said gently. "It was a choice. I chose to invest rather than spend. I chose financial security over designer labels. But I never asked you to make those same choices, and I certainly never judged you for your priorities." "You absolutely judged us," Thomas cut in. "Every time we talked about a vacation or a house upgrade, you'd get that look, like we were being frivolous or irresponsible." "Because you were living beyond your means, Thomas. Not because the things themselves were wrong, but because you couldn't afford them without my subsidies." "Which you were happy to provide until suddenly you weren't," he shot back. I poured 3 cups of coffee and brought them to the living area, gesturing for them to sit. I was happy to help my family. I'm still happy to help in appropriate ways. What changed was how you viewed me, as someone who needed management rather than respect. Vanessa accepted the coffee, but didn't drink it. "Mom, we were worried about..." "You. Genuinely worried. You've been living alone, never talking about money except to say things were fine. And then suddenly you're retiring with no apparent plan. What were we supposed to think?" "You were supposed to ask," I said simply. "Ask about my career. Ask about my retirement planning. Ask about my financial situation instead of assuming you knew better." "We did ask," Thomas protested, "at Christmas, and you got defensive." "No, Thomas. You didn't ask. You told. You told me I was confused. You told me I needed supervision. You told me I should sell my home and move where you deemed appropriate. Not once did you say, 'Claire, we're concerned about your retirement. Can you tell us about your preparations?'" Vanessa stared into her untouched coffee. "So, you cut us off completely? Just like that?" I sighed. "I stopped enabling financial dependence. The trust funds for the children are untouched. I'm still your mother, still their grandmother. What's changed is that I'm no longer your supplementary income. And you bought all this," Thomas gestured around the condo. "To what? Show us up? Prove a point? I bought this because I've wanted an ocean view for 20 years, and I finally decided to prioritize my own dreams." I took a sip of my coffee. The timing was perhaps pointed, I'll admit. Vanessa finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been? Finding out that my mother, who I thought worked as some kind of bank clerk, was actually this financial genius the whole time? That everyone in your life knew except us? Diana knew, I acknowledged. A few close colleagues. No one else. In my personal life. But why keep it from us? Your own family? I considered the question carefully. Initially, because you were too young to understand or care what Mommy did all day. Later, because it just never seemed important to correct the narrative. And eventually, because I saw how you and Thomas treated people you considered financially inferior, and I wasn't eager to subject myself to the reverse dynamic. Thomas flushed. That's completely unfair. Is it? Thomas, just last week you tried to have your boss contact me to manage my naive widow money for a commission. You literally tried to profit from the assumption that I was financially ignorant. That was a misunderstanding, he said weakly. It was opportunism, I corrected, and it's precisely why I kept my financial knowledge to myself all these years. Vanessa wiped her eyes. So what happens now? You just go on with your fabulous secret life, and we struggle to maintain the lifestyle you helped create. What happens now, I said carefully, is that we reset our relationship on more honest terms. I'm not cutting you out of my life, Vanessa. I'm cutting off financial dependency. There's a difference. It doesn't feel different from where I'm sitting, she muttered. I understand that. Change is difficult, especially when it affects your material comfort. But consider this. You and Thomas have advantages that most people would envy. Good educations, professional careers, healthy children, family support. The only thing you're losing is supplemental income you never earned in the first place. Thomas stood abruptly. I need some air. He walked onto the balcony and closed the door behind him, leaving Vanessa and me alone. He's been miserable, she said quietly. His boss has been questioning his judgment ever since that phone call. He might lose his year-end bonus. I'm sorry for that, I said, and meant it. That wasn't my intention. What was your intention? Mom? To teach us a lesson? To punish us for Christmas? I reached for her hand and to my surprise, she didn't pull away. My intention was to reclaim my autonomy, to stop being valued only for what I could provide, and yes, to correct some unhealthy patterns that I helped create. By humiliating us. That wasn't the goal, but I understand why it feels that way. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the shore. The twins miss you, Vanessa finally said. They ask where Grandma is. I miss them too, all of them. I squeezed her hand. My issue was never with the children, Vanessa. My love for them hasn't changed. But our access to your money has. There was bitterness in her voice, but less heat than before. Yes, I acknowledged. Because that relationship had become unhealthy for all of us. You and Thomas living beyond your means, me enabling dependency, all of us operating under false assumptions. Vanessa withdrew her hand and stood, walking, to the window to look out at the ocean. You know what the worst part is? Not the money. It's realizing that my own mother has been essentially a stranger all these years. That you let me believe a completely false story about who you are. I'm still the same person, Vanessa. The same mother who raised you, who loves you, who wants the best for you. My profession and financial status don't change that. But they change how I see you, how I understand our whole history together. She turned to face me. Do you know how many times I've felt sorry for you? Worried about you living on a fixed income? Assumed you couldn't possibly understand the pressures of our lives because you'd never had real professional success? The words stung, but I nodded. I do know, and that's partly my fault for allowing those assumptions to continue, but it's also partly yours for making them in the first place. Thomas returned from the balcony, his expression more controlled. We should head back to our hotel. Our flight leaves early tomorrow. You're leaving already? I asked, surprised. You just got here. We can't afford to extend our stay, Vanessa said pointedly. The hotel costs more per night than our monthly car payment. I let the barb pass. I understand, but I hope this isn't the end of our conversation. What more is there to say? Thomas asked. You've made your position abundantly clear. Actually, I said, standing, I have a proposal, but it requires both of you to listen with an open mind. They exchanged glances, wariness evident in their postures. I'm not going to resume our previous financial arrangement, I clarified. That's non-negotiable. But I'd like to offer something else, something that addresses the real issues. Which are? Thomas's tone was skeptical. Financial literacy, independence, breaking the cycle. I looked directly at Vanessa. I'd like to help you establish your own financial security, not by giving you money, but by teaching you how to manage and grow what you have. Vanessa gave a short, incredulous laugh. You want to be our financial advisor now? No, I want to be your mother and grandmother without the complication of financial dependence. But I do have expertise that could help you transition to a sustainable lifestyle. We don't need financial literacy training, Thomas said stiffly. I work in finance. You work in sales at a financial firm, I corrected gently. It's not the same as understanding personal financial management. His face flushed, but he didn't argue the point. My offer is this. I'll help you create a realistic budget based on your actual income. I'll show you how to start building your own investment portfolio, even with modest initial contributions. And I'll continue to cover the children's education through their trust funds. That's your big offer? Vanessa's voice was tight. Teaching us to clip coupons while you live in luxury? No, Vanessa. Teaching you to build your own luxury, if that's what you want. The same way I built mine, with patience, planning, and priorities. Thomas shook his head. This is unbelievable. You realize you're talking to us like we're children, right? I'm talking to you like adults who need specific information that I happen to possess, I countered. Whether you choose to accept that information is entirely up to you. Vanessa grabbed her purse. We need to go. Jackson has a FaceTime date with us this evening, and I don't want to miss it. Tell him I love him, I said quietly. All of them. She paused at the door. You could tell them yourself if you hadn't decided your ocean view was more important than your family. After they left, I sat alone on my balcony, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. Had I handled that right? Was there a better way to rebuild our relationship without falling back into old patterns? The questions circled without resolution. The next morning, I received a text from Vanessa. We'll think about your offer. It wasn't much, but it was something. A narrow opening that might eventually widen into a new kind of relationship. For now, it would have to be enough. 3 weeks passed with minimal communication. I sent birthday gifts to Jackson and received a polite thank you email from Vanessa. I forwarded articles about financial planning for young families and got no response. The silence was painful but necessary. We all needed time to adjust to our new reality. Then came the call I'd been half expecting. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was at my Portland home watering the garden when my phone rang with Thomas's number. Claire, he began without preamble. I've been let go from Henley. I set down my watering can. I'm sorry to hear that, Thomas. What happened? What happened? His laugh was bitter. You happened. After that call with Bradley, he's been watching me like a hawk, found some minor compliance issues and used them as an excuse. Thomas, I had nothing to do with… Save? It, he cut me off. Maybe you didn't intend for this to happen, but it did. And now we're really in trouble. I took a deep breath. Have you started looking for other positions? Of course I have. But financial firms talk to each other. Word gets around when someone's been terminated for compliance concerns. I see. I considered my words carefully. What are your immediate needs? Now you care about our needs? The anger in his voice was palpable. After you've systematically dismantled our lives, I care about my grandchildren not suffering from adult conflicts, I said evenly. And despite everything, I care about you and Vanessa too. There was a long silence, then a heavy sigh. We're behind on the mortgage. 2 months now. The bank is making noises about foreclosure proceedings. The situation was worse than I'd anticipated. Where's Vanessa now? At work. She doesn't know I'm calling you. She'd be furious if she knew. Then why are you? Another pause. Because I'm out of options, and because maybe some of what you said made sense, about us living beyond our means, about needing to change. It was a significant admission from Thomas, who had always projected absolute confidence in his financial decisions. I'd like to help, I said carefully. But not by simply writing a check this time. That approach hasn't served any of us well. What then? His voice held a mix of desperation and resignation. Let me review your complete financial situation. All of it. Income, expenses, debts, assets. No hiding anything. From there, we can develop an actual plan, not just a temporary fix. And in the meantime, we could lose our home in a matter of weeks. I thought for a moment. I could make the mortgage current as an interest-free loan with structured repayment terms. But only if you and Vanessa agree to the full financial planning process. A loan. He sounded skeptical. With what collateral? Your word, I said simply. And a legal agreement that outlines repayment expectations. You don't trust us. This isn't about trust, Thomas. It's about establishing healthier financial boundaries. The loan would be a business arrangement, separate from our family relationship. Vanessa will never agree to this. She's still furious with you. Then you'll need to help her understand what's at stake. I'm offering a path forward, not just a Band-Aid solution. After more discussion, Thomas reluctantly agreed to talk to Vanessa and let me know their decision. I hung up feeling both worried and cautiously hopeful. This crisis could lead to meaningful change, or it could deepen the rift between us beyond repair. That evening, Vanessa called. Her voice was strained but controlled. Thomas told me about your conversation, about your offer. And what do you think? I asked. I think it's humiliating. I think you're enjoying watching us struggle. So what's the solution? Besides, spend less, which we've already started doing. The solution has multiple components, I said. First, we need to stabilize the situation by addressing high-interest debt. Second, we need to align your fixed expenses with your reliable income. And third, we need to establish an emergency fund so unexpected events don't immediately trigger new debt. That sounds great in theory, Vanessa said. But how exactly do we do that when Thomas is unemployed? And we're already behind on everything? One option would be to consider downsizing your home, I suggested carefully. The Boston real estate market is strong. You could potentially sell the brownstone, pay off your debts, and purchase a more affordable property outright. Absolutely. Not, Vanessa's response was immediate. The schools, our community, the children's friends, we're not uprooting everything. I understand, I said, though I didn't entirely. The attachment to status symbols had always been a blind spot for both of them. In that case, we need to look at other significant expenses that could be reduced. We spent the next 2 hours going through their budget line by line. The country club membership would have to go. One of the luxury cars would be replaced with a more affordable option. The weekly housekeeper would be reduced to bi-weekly. The private chef for dinner parties would be eliminated entirely. The children's extracurricular activities would need to be prioritized, keeping the most meaningful, suspending the rest. Throughout the process, I was careful to frame each change as a choice rather than a directive. If private school remains your top priority, then other areas will need to adjust accordingly. The question is, what matters most to your family? By the end of our session, We had identified potential monthly savings of nearly $9,000, significant, but still not enough to close the gap completely given Thomas's unemployment. The larger question of his career path remained unaddressed. "You've both been remarkably open to these difficult conversations," I said as we prepared to conclude. "I know this isn't easy." Vanessa looked exhausted. "It's not like we have much choice." "There are always choices," I reminded her, "including choices I might not agree with. My role here is to help you see the full picture and potential consequences, not to make decisions for you." "What about—" Thomas hesitated. "What about more substantial assistance? Not ongoing support, but a one-time intervention to clear the high-interest debt?" And there it was, the request I'd been half expecting since we began. "I'm open to discussing that," I said carefully, "but only as part of a comprehensive plan that addresses the underlying patterns, not just the symptoms." "Meaning?" Vanessa asked. "Meaning I'd want to see demonstrated commitment to the changes we've discussed today. 3 months of adhering to the new budget, active job searching for Thomas, financial education for both of you, including the children as appropriate for their ages." "You're setting conditions," Vanessa observed, but without the anger I'd anticipated. "I'm establishing parameters that ensure my assistance actually helps rather than enables," I corrected. "There's a difference." Thomas looked thoughtful. "And after 3 months, if we've met these parameters, then I'd consider providing a one-time debt consolidation loan at minimal interest, structured with clear repayment terms based on your actual income capacity." "A loan," Vanessa repeated, "not a gift." "Correct, because the goal is independence, not dependence. If Thomas remains unemployed longer than expected, we can revisit the repayment schedule. But the fundamental principle remains. This isn't an unlimited resource without accountability." They exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that long-term couples perfect. "We'll think about it," Thomas finally said. "That's all I ask," I replied. "And regardless of what you decide about the loan offer, I hope we can continue these planning sessions. They're valuable regardless of external assistance." After we disconnected, I sat back in my chair, emotionally drained. The session had gone better than I'd feared, but not as well as I'd hoped. They were engaging with the process, but their fundamental beliefs about money, its purpose, its management, its role in defining success, remained largely unexamined. My phone pinged with a text from Vanessa. "Thank you for today. It was hard, but helpful." Those 8 words gave me more hope than anything else had since this conflict began. Not because they suggested capitulation to my perspective, but because they acknowledged the value of difficult conversations, the possibility that confronting uncomfortable truths might actually lead somewhere positive. Over the next month, our financial planning sessions continued weekly. Thomas secured several job interviews but had yet to receive an offer. Vanessa, surprisingly, became the more engaged participant in our discussions, asking thoughtful questions about investment strategies and retirement planning. "I never realized how little I understood about all this," she admitted during our 4th session. "It's like there was this whole world of knowledge that I just opted out of because it seemed boring or complicated." "Most people feel that way," I assured her. "Financial literacy isn't taught in schools, and there's an entire industry built around making it seem more complex than it needs to be. Still, I should have asked more questions about your work, about how you managed to help us so much. I just took it for granted." It was the closest she'd come to an apology, and I accepted it as such. "We all have blind spots, Vanessa. I certainly had mine when it came to enabling financial dependency." During our 5th session, they shared their first month's results on the new budget. They'd exceeded the savings targets we'd set, cutting expenses by nearly $11,000 through a combination of planned reductions and additional discretionary spending cuts they'd identified themselves. The kids have actually been amazing about it, Vanessa reported with evident surprise. We explained that we needed to make some changes, be more mindful about spending. Jackson suggested a game where they earn points for finding free activities to do as a family. Children often understand more than we give them credit for, I noted. And they learn their values about money by watching how we handle it. That's what scares me, Thomas admitted. What have we been teaching them all these years? That more is always better? That appearances matter more than security? It was a moment of genuine self-reflection that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. By the end of the second month, 2 significant developments occurred. First, Thomas received a job offer from a smaller financial firm. The base salary was lower than his previous position, but the role offered growth potential and a more ethical approach to client services. Second, they had begun actively paying down their credit card debt, using the savings from their budget adjustments to target the highest interest accounts first. We've paid off 1 card completely, Vanessa announced during our session, unable to hide her pride. It was the smallest balance, but still, it feels like actual progress. It is progress, I confirmed, and the psychological benefit of eliminating an entire debt obligation shouldn't be underestimated. It creates momentum. By the end of the 3rd month, they had reduced their credit card debt by nearly $18,000 through a combination of budgetary discipline and selling unused luxury items, designer handbags, electronics, exercise equipment that had been gathering dust. We're still interested in the consolidation loan, Thomas said during our review session, but for a smaller amount than originally discussed. We've realized we can handle more of this ourselves than we thought. I felt a surge of pride that I tried not to show too obviously. I think that demonstrates exactly the kind of progress that makes such assistance productive rather than enabling. We agreed on terms for a $50,000 loan to clear the remaining highest interest debt, with a 5-year repayment schedule tied to Thomas's new income. The interest rate was minimal, just enough to maintain the principle that this was a business, arrangement with expectations, not a gift without accountability. The real breakthrough, however, came unexpectedly during a weekend visit to my coastal condo. Vanessa had suggested bringing the children for a day trip, the first time they'd visit my new home. I think you've manufactured this whole situation to force us to come crawling back on your terms. I sighed. None of that is true, Vanessa. I didn't cause Thomas to lose his job. I didn't create your financial problems. All I did was stop enabling unsustainable spending habits. By cutting us off without warning. After you suggested I was mentally unfit to manage my own money, I reminded her. That was the breaking point, not some master plan to teach you a lesson. So now what? We become your financial rehabilitation project? Let you dictate how we live, what we spend, where we send our children to school? No, I said firmly. You make your own decisions about all of those things. The only difference is that you'll be making them with full awareness of your actual financial situation, not with the assumption that I'll cover the gaps. And if we refuse your help, then you refuse it. I'm not forcing anything on you, Vanessa. I'm offering a potential solution to your immediate crisis and a framework for avoiding similar crises in the future. Whether you accept is entirely your choice. There was a long pause. You'd really let us lose our home? Your grandchildren's home? The question hit me like a physical blow. Would I? Could I stand by and watch them face foreclosure, knowing I had the means to prevent it? I don't want that to happen, I said, honestly. But I also don't want to reinforce the idea that there are no consequences to financial decisions, or that I'll always be there to rescue you regardless of circumstances. So that's a yes. Her voice had turned cold. You would let us lose our home. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. I could hear her struggling to keep her composure. Let me be very clear, Mom. If we lose this house, if my children are forced to leave their schools and friends, if our lives are upended because you've decided to teach us some twisted lesson about financial responsibility, we're done. Permanently. You won't see the grandchildren again. You won't be welcome in our lives in any capacity. Is that what you want? The ultimatum wasn't entirely unexpected, but it still knocked the wind out of me. Of course that's not what I want. But threats and emotional manipulation aren't the basis for a healthy relationship either, Vanessa. Neither is financial manipulation, she shot back, which is exactly what you're doing. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll pay the mortgage arrears directly to the bank as a gift, not a loan. But any future financial assistance will be contingent on you and Thomas working with me on a comprehensive financial plan. That's my final offer. And if we take your money but refuse your planning services, then that will be the last financial assistance you receive from me outside of the children's education funds, and you'll need to accept that as the new normal. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. You've changed, Mom. You've become hard, calculating. Like money matters more than family. No, Vanessa. I've finally recognized that constantly rescuing you from financial consequences isn't actually helping you. It's substituting temporary relief for real growth. And it's creating a relationship dynamic based on dependence rather than mutual respect. Fine, she said after another long pause. Pay the mortgage. We'll do your financial planning sessions, but don't expect us to be happy about it, and don't expect this to fix everything between us. I don't, I assured her. This is just a start, a way to address the immediate crisis while beginning to build something healthier for the future. After confirming the details, we ended the call. I sat in my garden for a long time afterward, wondering if I'd made the right decision. Was I being manipulated? Was I manipulating them? The lines between support, enabling, and control seemed increasingly blurred. The next day, I arranged for the mortgage payments and scheduled a video call for the following weekend to begin reviewing their finances. In the meantime, I reached out to a colleague who specialized in financial psychology, the study of how emotions, beliefs, and behaviors influence financial decisions. I needed objective guidance to navigate this process without allowing family dynamics to derail it. When Saturday arrived, I sat at my desk with spreadsheets ready, feeling more nervous than I ever had before major client presentations. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about rebuilding trust with my daughter. The stakes couldn't be higher. Thomas and Vanessa appeared on my screen exactly on time, both looking uncomfortable but present. Vanessa's expression was guarded. Thomas's resigned. I noticed they were sitting in their home office, a room I'd rarely seen during video calls. Usually, they preferred to showcase their elegantly decorated living room. Thank you for agreeing to this, I began. I know it isn't easy. Let's just get it over with, Vanessa replied, but her tone lacked the hostility of our previous conversation. First, I want to clarify something important. My goal isn't to judge your past decisions or dictate your future ones. Financial planning is about aligning your resources with your priorities, whatever those priorities may be. Thomas nodded slightly. We've prepared the documents you requested. Income statements, expenses, debt schedules. It's not pretty. I appreciate your transparency, I said. That's the most important first step. They shared their screen, and I saw a spreadsheet listing their household expenses. The numbers were staggering. Private school tuition for 3 children, the mortgage on the brownstone, 2 luxury car leases, country club membership, household staff, credit card debt, spread across multiple accounts with interest rates ranging from 17 to 24%. Your combined annual income is approximately $320,000, I noted. That's an impressive figure, higher than most American households. But your annual expenses total almost $420,000. We've had supplemental income, Thomas said defensively. Bonuses, commissions. And now? I asked gently. He looked away. None of that is guaranteed anymore. I moved to the debt schedule. Nearly $78,000 in credit card debt. A home equity line of credit with $62,000 drawn. Personal loans totaling $43,000. All this on top of their substantial mortgage. The immediate problem is cash flow, I explained. You're spending significantly more than you earn and covering the difference with debt. That creates a downward spiral as interest payments consume an ever larger portion of your income. We know how debt works, Mom, Vanessa said tightly. Understanding conceptually and seeing the concrete impact on your specific situation are different things, I replied. Right now, you're paying nearly $4,000 monthly just in minimum debt payments, not including your mortgage. Thomas rubbed his face. I spent days preparing, stocking favorite snacks, purchasing age-appropriate beach toys, child-proofing cabinets for the twins. They arrived mid-morning, the children tumbling from the car with the boundless energy of youth. Jackson, now 7, immediately wanted a tour. The twins, at 4, headed straight for the large windows overlooking the ocean. Can we go to the beach, Grandma? Jackson asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Of course, I promised, right after lunch. As the children explored under Thomas's supervision, Vanessa joined me in the kitchen where I was preparing sandwiches. Need help? She offered, already reaching for the bread. Always. I smiled, handing her the cutting board. We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. I've been thinking a lot about why I reacted so strongly to discovering your financial expertise, she said, focusing intently on slicing tomatoes. It wasn't just embarrassment, though. There was plenty of that. What else was it? I asked gently. I think. She hesitated. I think I was afraid. Afraid of what? She set down the knife, finally meeting my eyes. Afraid that if you didn't need our approval or inclusion, if you were completely self-sufficient, you might not want us in your life at all. That, without the financial connection, there wouldn't be any reason for you to put up with us. The admission stunned me. Vanessa, you're my daughter. I love you. That has nothing to do with money or need. I know that intellectually, she said. But emotionally, I think I've been worried for years that we weren't giving you enough in return for everything you did for us. That someday you'd realize the imbalance and just walk away. So you tried to create a role for yourselves as my caretakers. I realized aloud, hence the suggestion about selling my house, managing my finances. She nodded, looking both relieved and ashamed. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. But yes, I think that's exactly what happened. We needed to feel necessary to you. Oh, sweetheart. I reached for her hand. You are necessary. To me. Not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are. My daughter, the mother of my grandchildren, a person I love unconditionally. Tears welled in her eyes. Even after everything? The way we treated you, the things we said? Even after everything, I confirmed. Family relationships are complicated. We make mistakes, we hurt each other, we learn and grow. But the love doesn't disappear because of bumps in the road. She wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, for assuming you couldn't handle your own affairs, for taking your help for granted all these years, for threatening to keep the kids from you when things got difficult. And I'm sorry too, I said, for enabling patterns that weren't healthy for any of us, for not being more transparent about my finances and expertise, for the abrupt way I changed our arrangement. We're quite a pair, aren't we? She gave a watery laugh. We certainly are. I squeezed her hand, but I think we're getting better. After lunch, we all walked down to the beach. I watched as Thomas helped the twins build a sandcastle, as Jackson searched for shells with Vanessa, as the family I loved navigated their new reality with unexpected grace. There were still challenges ahead: the loan to repay, new financial habits to solidify, old patterns to unlearn. But for the first time in months, I felt confident that we were moving in the right direction. That evening, as they prepared to leave, Jackson hugged me tightly. "Can we come back next weekend, Grandma? I want to finish my shell collection." "Anytime you want," I promised, looking over his head at Vanessa and Thomas. "My door is always open." "Maybe not just for visits," Thomas suggested tentatively. "We've been talking about whether you might be willing to teach Jackson some basic financial concepts. He's been asking questions since we started being more open about our budget." "I'd be honored," I said, genuinely touched by the request. It represented a level of trust I hadn't been sure we'd rebuild. As their car pulled away, I stood on my balcony watching until the taillights disappeared around the bend. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. I'd dreamed of this view for 20 years, but I'd never imagined the complicated path that would lead me here, or the lessons we'd all learn along the way. My phone chimed with a text from Vanessa. "Thank you for today, and for everything else. We love you." I smiled, typing back, "I love you too, all of you." The journey wasn't over. There would be setbacks, disagreements, moments of doubt. But we had crossed a threshold from transaction to transformation, from enabling to empowering, from financial dependence to something far more valuable: mutual respect and authentic connection. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to establish are with the people we love most. But as I watched the final rays of sunlight disappear below the horizon, I understood with perfect clarity that those boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're foundations upon which stronger, healthier relationships can be built. The credit cards I canceled weren't just plastic. They were symbols of an imbalanced dynamic that had diminished all of us in different ways. By ending that arrangement, painful as it was, I had created space for something better to emerge. A family connected by choice and love rather than financial obligation. The ocean before me stretched endless and deep, a reminder that some treasures take time to discover. I had found mine at 63, financial security, yes, but more importantly, the courage to stand in my truth and the wisdom to help those I loved find their own path to independence. Not by funding their journey, but by teaching them to navigate for themselves. There are some lessons we can only learn when the safety nets are removed, when we're forced to confront our own capabilities and limitations. For Vanessa and Thomas, that lesson had been painful but necessary. For me, the lesson had been equally profound. That true generosity isn't measured in dollars given, but in wisdom shared, boundaries respected, and independence fostered. The darkness settled around me, stars emerging one by one above the water. I breathed deeply, grateful for second chances, for difficult conversations, for the messy, complicated, beautiful process of growth. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give isn't financial security, but the belief that those we love are capable of creating their own. 6 months had passed since our first difficult financial planning session, and the transformation in my relationship with Vanessa and Thomas continued to evolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. Thomas had settled into his new position at the smaller financial firm, where his responsibilities focused more on client education than sales targets. The change suited him. There was a genuineness to his enthusiasm that had been missing in his previous role. "I actually sleep better at night," he admitted during a Sunday dinner at my Portland home. "I'm not constantly chasing impossible numbers or pushing products I don't believe in." "The pay difference must be challenging, though," I observed, passing him the salad bowl. "It is," he acknowledged, "but we're managing, and the firm has a profit-sharing structure that could make up some of the difference if we perform well collectively." Vanessa, who had been listening while helping the twins with their food, added, "The bizarre thing is that we're actually happier with less." I would have laughed if anyone had suggested that a year ago. Less stuff, more peace, I suggested. Exactly. Though I still miss the housekeeper, she added with a wry smile. The loan I had provided was being repaid according to schedule, with Thomas making monthly transfers like clockwork. More impressive than their financial discipline, however, was the shift in their approach to the children's understanding of money. Jackson now received an allowance divided into 3 clear containers: spending, saving, and giving. The twins, though still too young to fully grasp financial concepts, were learning to make simple choices about which activities or treats were worth their special tokens. Jackson asked me the most surprising question yesterday, Vanessa said as we cleared the dinner plates. He wanted to know if we could help him open an investment account with his birthday money from Uncle David. At 7, I couldn't hide my astonishment. He heard us talking about compound interest and decided he wants to make his money grow. His words, not mine. She shook her head, but her expression was proud. We told him he needs to keep his savings account until he's older, but we'd help him learn about different types of investments in the meantime. I may have some resources that would help with that, I offered. There are excellent books and games designed to teach children financial concepts. We'd appreciate that, Thomas said, joining us with a stack of cups from the dining room. We're still learning ourselves, to be honest. Those simple words, "we're still learning," represented such a profound shift from the defensiveness and certainty that had characterized their approach to finances before our confrontation. The humility to acknowledge their own knowledge gaps had created space for genuine growth. Not that everything was perfect. There were still occasional tension points, particularly around the grandchildren's educational expenses. The private school tuition remained a significant strain on their adjusted budget, and I sometimes wondered if they were maintaining this particular expense out of genuine priority or lingering pride. Have you considered the public school options? I asked carefully one evening during our now monthly financial review call. The districts around Cambridge have some excellent programs. Thomas and Vanessa exchanged one of their looks, the kind that conveyed an entire private conversation in seconds. We've toured a few, Vanessa admitted. The elementary school closest to us has a strong STEM focus that would be perfect for Jackson. But? I prompted, sensing the unspoken reservation. But it's complicated, Thomas said. Socially, academically, the transition would be challenging. And if we're being completely honest, Vanessa added, there's a part of me that feels like we'd be failing them somehow, like we promised them a certain kind of life, and now we're taking it away. Children are remarkably adaptable, suggested. Far more than we give them credit for. And they learn from watching how we handle challenges. Like downsizing our expectations? Thomas asked with a slight edge to his voice. I'd frame it differently, I countered. Like aligning our choices with our values. If educational excellence is the priority, there are multiple paths to achieve that. The question is whether the specific path of private education is worth the financial trade-offs required to maintain it. They didn't make any decisions that night, but 2 weeks later, Vanessa called with news. We're transferring Jackson to the public school for the fall semester, she announced without preamble. We had him spend a day there last week, and he loved their science lab, said it was way cooler than his current school. That's a significant change, I observed, careful to keep any hint of victory from my tone. This needed to be their decision, not my triumph. It reduces our expenses by $24,000 a year just for him, Vanessa said. The twins will stay in their preschool for now. They're still settling in after some separation anxiety issues, but we'll reassess before kindergarten. How do you feel about the decision? I asked, more interested in her emotional response than the financial details. There was a pause before she answered. Relieved, actually. We've been stretching so hard to maintain everything exactly as it was, and it's been exhausting. This feels like, I don't know, Like we're finally making choices rather than just desperately trying to hang on to a lifestyle that was never really sustainable. The wisdom in her words struck me profoundly. So much of their struggle, and my enabling of it, had been about maintaining appearances, preserving a facade of affluence that required constant behind-the-scenes scrambling. The shift toward authenticity represented growth I hadn't dared hope for 6 months earlier. This authenticity extended to other areas of their lives as well. Thomas had begun talking more openly with his colleagues about work-life balance and the pressure to project success. Vanessa had started a blog about their family's journey toward intentional living, as she called it, connecting with other parents navigating similar shifts in priorities. "It's not about deprivation," she explained when showing me the blog, during a video call. "It's about thoughtfulness, asking why we want what we want, need what we think we need." "That's a profound question most people never ask," I noted. "We certainly never did," Thomas acknowledged. "We just assumed more was better, period." As summer approached, they mentioned they were reconsidering their annual vacation plans. Instead of the luxury resort in the Caribbean they'd frequented, in previous years they were exploring options closer to home. "We're thinking about renting a lake house in New Hampshire for 2 weeks," Vanessa explained. "It's a fraction of the cost, no flights required, and the kids would have more space to run around than at a resort." "That sounds wonderful," I said, honestly. "Some of my favorite childhood memories are from simple lakeside vacations." "We were wondering." Thomas hesitated, glancing at Vanessa. "Would you consider joining us for part of the time? Maybe the middle weekend? The house has plenty of room, and the kids would love having you there." The invitation caught me by surprise. Despite our improved relationship, we hadn't yet spent extended leisure time together since the confrontation. Our interactions had primarily centered around financial discussions, Sunday dinners, and brief visits with the children. "I'd be delighted," I said, touched by the gesture. The New Hampshire trip marked a turning point in our evolving family dynamic. Away from the pressures and patterns of daily life, in a setting that emphasized natural beauty over material luxury, we found a new ease with one another. The children led the way, their enthusiasm for simple pleasures, catching frogs by the bar dock, toasting marshmallows over the fire pit, watching storms roll across the lake, infectious and centering. One evening, after the children were asleep, the 3 of us sat on the screened porch, listening to the chorus of nighttime insects and sipping wine from modest glasses. "I've been thinking about something," Thomas said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about why we reacted so strongly to the suggestion that Claire should oversee our finances." Vanessa shifted in her chair. "That feels like ancient history now." "Not really," he disagreed gently. "I think understanding it helps prevent similar mistakes in the future." I stayed quiet, curious where he was headed with this reflection. "The thing is," he continued, "we were terrified of being exposed. Not just to you, Claire, but to ourselves. If we acknowledge the reality of our financial situation, we'd have to face how hollow our supposed success really was." "Hollow?" I prompted. "Built on sand," Vanessa clarified. "Designer labels we couldn't afford, vacations purchased on credit, status symbols that were literally bankrupting us while we pretended everything was fine." "So when you suggested—" "Taking control of my finances," I said slowly, "it was partly projection, seeing the manageable anxiety about my future as a way to avoid the much larger anxiety about your own." Thomas nodded. "I think so. Plus, it gave us a sense of purpose, of value. If we couldn't succeed on our own terms, at least we could position ourselves as your protectors, your guides through a complex financial landscape." "The irony being that I literally did that professionally for decades," I observed dryly. "The irony being that we needed your expertise far more than you needed ours," Vanessa corrected. But admitting that felt like failure. "There's something powerful about naming these dynamics," I said after a moment. About bringing unconscious motivations into the light where they can be examined. And hopefully transcended, Thomas added. Though not always easily, Vanessa sighed. I still catch myself sometimes. Seeing something expensive and feeling that old impulse, that sense that having it would somehow make me more worthwhile. That's normal, I assured her. Those associations between consumption and value are deeply ingrained in our culture. The important thing isn't never feeling the impulse. It's developing awareness of it when it arises. The conversation drifted to other topics, but that evening remained significant in my memory, a moment when the pretenses fell away completely, allowing for genuine connection beyond financial transactions or family obligations. We were finally seeing each other as complex human beings, not just as roles to be played or resources to be managed. Upon returning from New Hampshire, Vanessa approached me with an unexpected request. She'd been offered an opportunity to speak at a women's leadership conference about her professional work in marketing, combined with insights from her increasingly popular blog about intentional living. The thing is, she explained during a phone call, part of my story now includes what I've learned from you about financial literacy, about the psychological aspects of spending, about aligning resources with values. Would you be willing to help me prepare? Maybe review my outline? Give feedback on the key points? Of course, I agreed immediately. Though I'm curious, why not ask Thomas? Finance is his professional field after all. There was a pause before she answered. Because this feels like a mother-daughter thing. A passing of wisdom that I want to honor correctly. And honestly, because you explain these concepts more clearly than anyone I've ever met. You make the complex understandable without oversimplifying. Her words touched something deep within me, a recognition of professional value I'd rarely received from my own family. For decades, they'd benefited from my financial acumen without acknowledging its existence. Now, Vanessa wasn't just acknowledging it, she was actively seeking it out, valuing it explicitly. We spent several evenings collaborating on her presentation, refining key points about financial empowerment and the emotional dimensions of spending. The process revealed aspects of Vanessa I'd never fully appreciated. Her quick analytical mind, her talent for translating abstract concepts into relatable examples, her authentic vulnerability about her own journey. You know, I observed during one of our sessions, you have a natural gift for this. The way you're connecting personal narrative with practical guidance is quite powerful. I had a good teacher, she replied with a small smile, though I was a reluctant student at first. The best insights often come from our greatest challenges, I said, and you've faced this one with remarkable courage. The conference took place in Chicago on a crisp autumn weekend. Though I wasn't planning to attend, it seemed important for this to be Vanessa's moment without my hovering presence. She insisted. You're part of this story, she argued. I want you there. So I found myself sitting in a hotel ballroom, among hundreds of professional women, watching my daughter take the stage with a confidence I'd always known she possessed, but had rarely seen so fully expressed. My journey toward financial literacy began with a humbling realization, she began, her voice steady despite the large audience. I had confused consumption with accomplishment, spending with success, and it took my mother, a financial advisor, with decades of experience who I had somehow failed to truly see, to help me understand the difference. For the next 40 minutes, she wove together her personal story with practical insights about financial independence, conscious spending, and the particular challenges women face in separating self-worth from material acquisition. She was honest about the tensions in our relationship, the resistance she'd initially felt toward examining her financial habits, and the freedom she'd ultimately found in aligning her resources with her genuine priorities. The greatest gift my mother gave me wasn't financial support, she concluded. It was financial clarity. The courage to look squarely at my choices, their consequences, and the values they revealed. And now I'm passing that gift to my children, who are learning lessons at 7 that I didn't grasp until 60. The audience's applause was thunderous. Women lined up afterward to speak with Vanessa, many sharing their own stories of financial awakening or struggle. I waited at the back of the room, giving her space to absorb the impact of her presentation. When the crowd finally thinned, she made her way to me, her expression a mix of exhilaration and vulnerability. "Was it okay?" she asked, suddenly sounding like the little girl who had once brought home art projects for my approval. I worried it might be too personal. "It was magnificent," I said honestly. "Authentic, insightful, genuinely helpful to others. I couldn't be prouder." She hugged me tightly. "I meant every word, about the gift you gave us, though I wish I'd been ready to receive it sooner." "You received it exactly when you were ready," I assured her. "Not a moment before or after." That evening, as we celebrated with dinner at the hotel restaurant, Vanessa mentioned that several organizations had already reached out about additional speaking engagements. "They're offering honorariums," she said, looking slightly stunned. "Substantial ones. Apparently, there's high demand for content about women and financial empowerment." "That doesn't surprise me," I replied. "You're addressing a gap in financial education that affects millions of women." "I'm thinking of developing it into a more structured program," she continued, enthusiasm building in her voice. "Maybe workshops for women at different life stages, young professionals, new mothers, women approaching retirement." "That's a wonderful idea," I encouraged. "Your marketing background gives you insights into how to make these topics accessible and engaging." "Would you consider collaborating?" she asked hesitantly. "Not full-time or anything, but maybe as a consultant? Your expertise combined with my communications background could be powerful." The proposition was unexpected but intriguing. After decades of formal financial advising, the idea of sharing knowledge in a different context, especially alongside my daughter, held surprising appeal. "I'd be honored," I said, "though I thought you'd be eager to establish this as your own domain, separate from my influence." She considered this. "A year ago, maybe, when I was still defining myself in opposition to you in some ways. But now, I see the value in combining our strengths, your depth of knowledge, my ability to translate it for different audiences. Besides," she added with a smile, "what better demonstration of our message than a mother-daughter team showing how financial wisdom can strengthen rather than strain family bonds?" Over the next few months, what began as a tentative collaboration evolved into a structured initiative. Vanessa's marketing expertise proved invaluable in developing materials that were both substantively rigorous and emotionally resonant. My technical knowledge ensured the financial guidance was sound and comprehensive. We called the program Financial Clarity, focusing on the emotional and psychological dimensions of money management as much as the practical mechanics. Thomas, rather than feeling excluded, became one of our strongest supporters. His experiences in the traditional financial industry gave him insight into the gaps our program could fill. "Most financial education focuses exclusively on the numbers," he observed during a planning session. "The technical aspects. But you're addressing the human elements, the fears, habits, and unexamined beliefs that drive financial behavior. That's where the real transformation happens." As our program gained momentum, I found myself reflecting on the irony of the situation. The crisis that had begun with Vanessa and Thomas questioning my financial competence had culminated in a venture that celebrated and amplified that very expertise. The painful confrontation that had threatened to sever our relationship had ultimately created space for a more authentic connection, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. One evening, as Vanessa and I were finalizing materials for an upcoming workshop series, she paused, looking thoughtful. "You know what still amazes me?" she said. "How differently this all could have gone if you'd simply given in when we suggested taking control of your finances. If you'd continued supporting our lifestyle without question. If you'd chosen peace at any price rather than standing your ground. We'd all be poorer for it, I observed. Not just financially, but in every way that matters. Exactly. Your refusal to be diminished was actually the greatest act of love, for yourself and for us, even though we couldn't see it at the time. It wasn't easy, I admitted. There were moments I nearly relented, especially when access to the grandchildren was threatened. She winced. I'm still ashamed of that. Using the children as leverage was inexcusable. Fear makes us do desperate things, I said gently. And you were afraid of change, of loss, of facing financial realities you'd been avoiding for years. Still, she insisted, some tactics cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. I'm grateful you held firm despite that pressure. What helped? I reflected, was recognizing that true love sometimes requires difficult boundaries. That allowing harmful patterns to continue isn't actually loving, even when it feels easier in the moment. Vanessa nodded slowly. I think about that a lot now with the children. About the difference between indulgence and genuine nurturing. About what legacy I want to leave them beyond material comforts. And what have you concluded? I asked. That the greatest inheritance isn't financial, it's equipping them with the tools to build meaningful lives aligned with their own values. Teaching them to define success by how closely their choices match their deepest priorities, not by external validation or comparison to others. Her words echoed my own evolving philosophy, though I'd arrived at it much later in life than she had. In that moment, I felt the profound satisfaction of witnessing generational learning, of seeing my daughter grasp and extend insights that had taken me decades to fully comprehend. You've come so far, I said softly. We have, she corrected. All of us. As we returned to our work, finalizing slides and discussion guides for women seeking financial clarity in their own lives, I thought about the strange, winding path that had led us here. The confrontation that began with canceled credit cards and accusations of confusion had blossomed into a collaborative venture built on mutual respect and shared purpose. There had been no straight line from crisis to resolution, no neat three-step process to repair what had been damaged. Instead, there had been difficult conversations, tentative trust-building, occasional backsliding, and gradual shifts in understanding, the messy, non-linear work of genuine transformation. And through it all, through the confrontations and reconciliations, the painful truths and healing acknowledgments, one insight had become increasingly clear. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is to stand firmly in our own worth, refusing to be diminished even by those we care about most deeply. Because in doing so, we create the possibility for relationships based on authenticity rather than accommodation, respect rather than resentment, genuine connection rather than conditional transaction. The credit cards I'd canceled had been symbols of an imbalanced relationship, material manifestations of a dynamic that had diminished all of us in different ways. In withdrawing that particular form of support, I had created space for something far more valuable to emerge. The opportunity for my daughter and son-in-law to discover their own capacity for resilience, their own path to financial clarity, their own definition of meaningful success. And in that space, something unexpected had blossomed. Not just financial independence, but a deeper, more authentic family connection. One built not on dependency or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the genuine desire to see each other thrive. 1 year to the day after I'd canceled those credit cards, I sat in the back row of a community center in Cambridge, watching my grandson Jackson stand proudly at a small podium. At 8 years old, he was presenting what he'd learned in the Children's Financial Literacy Workshop that Vanessa and I had developed as an offshoot of our main program. My grandma taught me that money is like water, he explained to the audience of parents and fellow students. It can flow in different directions, and you get to decide where it goes. Some for now, some for later, and some to help other people. His simple explanation brought tears to my eyes, not just because of the pride I felt watching him grasp concepts that had eluded his parents for decades, but because of the journey that had brought us all to this moment. A journey that began with confrontation and had transformed into collaboration, with unexpected gifts emerging from painful truths. After the presentation, as families mingled over punch and cookies, Thomas approached with the twins in tow. At 5 years old, Emma and Olivia had their own budding understanding of financial concepts, primarily focused on the idea that choices have consequences. "The girls have something to show you," Thomas said, encouraging them forward. Emma proudly held out a small decorated jar labeled Giving Fund in wobbly letters. "We saved our special tokens," she explained seriously, "for the animal shelter." "We picked it ourselves," Olivia added, "'cause they help cats without mommies." "That's a wonderful choice," I told them, genuinely moved by their earnestness. "Those animals will be very grateful for your help." As the twins ran off to find their mother, Thomas lingered. "I never thought I'd see my children excited about savings jars," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Especially when I recall how dismissive I was about your financial advice initially." "They're learning earlier than most," I observed, "including their parents." "Including their father, certainly." He paused, his expression turning reflective. "You know, when I was growing up, money was never discussed in our house except as a source of stress. My father would stare at bills. In silence, my mother would hide purchases from him, and the tension was constant but never addressed. I swore I'd create a different atmosphere for my own family." "And you have," I assured him. "Just not in the way you originally imagined." "No," he agreed. "I thought success meant never worrying about money because there was always enough. I didn't understand that true financial peace comes from alignment and awareness, not abundance alone." His insight surprised me. Thomas had been the more resistant of the two initially, clinging longer to the prestige markers of his former lifestyle. Yet here he was, articulating a philosophy of financial well-being that many never grasp despite decades of prosperity. Children are fortunate to have parents who've learned these lessons," I said, "and who are willing to share their own journey, including the missteps." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's been one of the biggest shifts for me, recognizing that protecting them doesn't mean projecting an illusion of perfect financial mastery. It means modeling honest engagement with money, including the emotional aspects." Across the room, Vanessa was engaged in animated conversation with another mother. Since launching our financial literacy initiative, she'd discovered a genuine passion for education that transcended her marketing background. The workshops were now running in 3 locations across Boston, with plans to expand to other cities. What had begun as a tentative collaboration had blossomed into a thriving enterprise, combining my financial expertise with her communication skills. More significant than the program's success, however, was the transformation in our family dynamics. The power imbalance that had characterized our relationship for decades, me as provider, them as recipients, had shifted toward a more equitable exchange of value. They no longer needed my financial support to maintain their lifestyle, and I no longer carried the unspoken burden of being their safety net. The loan I'd provided to consolidate their high-interest debt had been repaid ahead of schedule, with Thomas making the final payment the previous month. "No more financial entanglements," he'd said when showing me the confirmation. "Just family ties." Those family ties had strengthened in unexpected ways, without the complicated dynamic of financial dependency clouding our interactions. We'd discovered genuine enjoyment in each other's company. Sunday dinners had evolved from obligation to pleasure. Vacation planning now focused on creating meaningful experiences rather than maintaining appearances. The grandchildren visited regularly, dividing time between my Portland home and coastal. Condo without the underlying tension that had previously accompanied family gatherings. As the event wound down, Vanessa joined us, her expression satisfied. 3 more schools have requested the children's program, she reported. And that community foundation we met with last week is prepared to fund workshops for low-income families. That's wonderful news, I said, genuinely pleased. While the program generated modest income, its greater value lay in the impact it was having on families seeking financial clarity, particularly women who, like Vanessa, had never been taught to engage confidently with financial decisions. We should celebrate, Thomas suggested. Maybe dinner at that new place by the harbor? Perfect, Vanessa agreed. Mom, you'll join us? I wouldn't miss it, I assured her. Later, as we sat at a table overlooking Boston Harbor, watching the sunset paint the water in vivid golds and crimsons, Jackson asked a question that caught me off guard. Grandma, were you always good with money, even when you were little like me? The question drew the adult's attention, creating one of those rare moments when family conversation deepens unexpectedly. No, I answered honestly. I had to learn, just like you're learning now. When I was young, no one taught me about saving or investing or making careful choices. Those were lessons I had to discover on my own, often through mistakes. What kind of mistakes? He asked, genuinely curious. I thought for a moment. I stayed too long in situations that weren't financially healthy because I didn't value my own worth. I made decisions based on emotional needs rather than practical realities. And for many years, I enabled others to depend on me rather than develop their own financial strength. Vanessa's eyes met mine across the table, acknowledging the gentle reference to our own history without defensiveness. The important thing, I continued, is that mistakes can become valuable lessons if we're willing to learn from them. Every financial choice teaches us something. About money, yes, but also about ourselves and what truly matters to us. Jackson considered this seriously. So making mistakes is okay as long as you learn from them? Exactly, Thomas answered before I could. In fact, some of life's most important lessons come from the mistakes we make and how we respond to them. Like, when you and Mommy had to stop using credit cards, Jackson asked innocently. There was a moment of startled silence before Vanessa laughed. Yes, exactly like that. That was a big lesson for Daddy and me about making better choices. And now you help other people learn about money too, Jackson observed, pride evident in his voice. We do, Vanessa confirmed, and Grandma helps us because she knows more about it than almost anyone. The simple acknowledgement, so different from the dismissive attitude they'd once held toward my financial expertise, reflected how thoroughly our relationship had evolved. What had once been a source of tension, even resentment, had transformed into a foundation for mutual respect and collaboration. After dinner, as we walked along the harbor promenade, Thomas fell into step beside me, while Vanessa went ahead with the children. I've been meaning to ask you something, he said, his tone casual but with an underlying nervousness I rarely heard from him anymore. It's about work. Oh, I prompted. I've been approached about a new position, senior financial educator at a community development institution. The focus would be helping low-income families build financial capacity through workshops, counseling, that sort of thing. That sounds perfect for your skills, I observed, especially given what you've learned through your own journey. That's what I thought too. He hesitated. The catch is that it's a significant pay cut from my current role, about 30% less. I waited, sensing there was more to his concern than the reduced salary. Vanessa says we should consider it, that we can adjust our budget accordingly, that the meaningful work would be worth the financial trade-off. He shook his head slightly. A year ago, a suggestion like that would have triggered a 3-day argument. And now? I asked. Now I'm actually considering it. More than considering, I'm excited about the possibility. He looked genuinely surprised by his own evolution. The thing is, I'd be working primarily with families in financial crisis, helping them develop sustainable plans rather than just quick fixes, using my experience in finance combined with, well, the perspective I've gained from our own challenges. It sounds like a perfect alignment of your professional skills and personal insights, I observed. That's what I thought too. But I wanted to get your take, given your experience with major career transitions. The request for my opinion, not just as a source of financial support, but as someone whose professional judgment he valued, touched me deeply. I've found that work aligned with your core values provides a satisfaction that purely financial rewards rarely match, I told him, especially as we mature and gain perspective on what genuinely matters. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. That's how I'm leaning. The financial adjustment would require some changes, but nothing we couldn't handle with proper planning. And you've developed those skills now, I reminded him. You have tools you didn't possess when making career decisions before. Thanks to you, he acknowledged. Thanks to your own willingness to learn and grow, I corrected gently. My role was simply opening a door you chose to walk through. Ahead of us, Vanessa had stopped with the children to watch a street performer juggling flaming torches. Their delighted laughter carried back to us on the evening breeze. The simple joy of the moment, family together, present and engaged, uncomplicated by the tension that had once permeated our interactions, felt like its own kind of wealth. I hope you take the position, I told Thomas. If it calls to you, if it feels right. I think it does, he said, smiling slightly. Which is something I never would have recognized before all of this. Before all of what? Before you canceled those credit cards and forced us to face reality. Before you refused to continue enabling patterns that were hurting all of us, even though it would have been easier to maintain the status quo. The directness of his statement, acknowledging the catalyst that had initiated our family's transformation, surprised me. We rarely reference that specific moment so explicitly, though its impact shaped everything that followed. That wasn't an easy decision, I admitted. I knew it might permanently damage our relationship. Instead, it saved it, he said simply, though I certainly didn't see it that way at the time. We rejoined Vanessa and the children, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. But Thomas's acknowledgement lingered in my mind throughout the evening and during the flight back to Portland the following day. There had been no guarantee that canceling those credit cards would lead to positive change. It could just as easily have severed our relationship permanently, cutting me off from my daughter and grandchildren as Vanessa had threatened during those first heated confrontations. What had given me the courage to take that risk? Perhaps it was the clarity that comes with age, the recognition that enabling harmful patterns isn't actually loving, no matter how it might feel in the moment. Perhaps it was simply the accumulated weariness of decades spent being valued primarily for what I could provide rather than who I was. Or perhaps it was the growing certainty that true support sometimes requires difficult boundaries, even when, especially when, those boundaries trigger resistance. Whatever the source of that courage, I remained profoundly grateful for where it had led us. Not to a perfect family, such a thing doesn't exist, but to one built on more authentic foundations than before. One where financial transactions no longer substituted for genuine connection. One where respect flowed in multiple directions, rather than being demanded from only one side. 2 months later, I received a text message from Thomas with a photo attached. It showed him standing outside a modest brick building with a sign reading, Community Financial Empowerment Center. His smile was genuine, his posture relaxed in a way I'd rarely seen during his years at the prestigious financial firm. First day at the new job. The message read, different kind of work, different kind of reward. Thank you for helping me recognize the difference. I smiled at my phone screen, warmth spreading through my chest. not the warmth of being needed or even appreciated, but the deeper satisfaction of witnessing genuine growth in someone you care about, of seeing them discover their own path to meaning and purpose, even if that path differs from the one they'd originally envisioned. That evening, I sat on my coastal balcony watching the sunset, reflecting on the journey of the past year. The high confrontation that began with canceled credit cards had evolved into a profound reset of family dynamics, personal values, and professional directions. What had initially felt like a painful rupture had created space for something healthier and more authentic to emerge. There would always be challenges, of course. Family relationships are never completely smooth, financial pressures never entirely absent. But we now face those challenges from a foundation of mutual respect and shared understanding rather than dependency and resentment. As darkness settled over the ocean, stars emerging in the clear spring sky, I felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with material wealth or financial security. It came from knowing that in standing firmly for my own worth, refusing to be diminished even by those I loved most, I had ultimately created space for all of us to grow. For my daughter and son-in-law to discover their capacity for resilience and adaptation. For my grandchildren to develop a healthier relationship with money than their parents had. And for myself to experience family connections based on genuine appreciation rather than financial utility. Sometimes the most valuable gifts we can offer those we love aren't material at all. Sometimes they come in the form of difficult truths, challenging boundaries, and the refusal to enable patterns that ultimately diminish everyone involved. The credit cards I canceled weren't just plastic. They were symbols of an imbalanced relationship that had outlived its usefulness. In withdrawing that form of support, I had created the possibility for something far more valuable to emerge. Family connections built on authenticity, mutual respect, and the shared journey toward alignment between resources and values. The true wealth, I realized as I watched the moonlight silvering the waves below, had nothing to do with investment portfolios or beachfront properties. It lay in the transformation itself, in the courage to risk comfort for truth, to choose growth over stagnation, to believe in the possibility of relationships based on mutual value rather than one-sided accommodation. That, ultimately, was the inheritance I hoped to leave my family. Not just financial knowledge or material assets, but the living example of standing in one's worth, speaking difficult truths with love, and creating boundaries that ultimately foster growth rather than dependence. It had taken 63 years to fully claim that legacy for myself. But as I watched the ocean waves reflecting the night sky, I felt profound gratitude that this hard-won wisdom would shape family relationships for generations to come. A different kind of compound interest, accumulating not in bank accounts, but in the hearts and minds of those I loved most dearly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.